So the unit I chose for this website is one that talks about the age of exploration and the age of enlightenment. And that's part of the reason why it's called Global History Classroom, is because it's considering all of global history. And I think the age of exploration and the age of enlightenment really show that. Another reason I chose these topics is because they have an impact on modern society. In the case of age of exploration, it brought about changes with map making and navigation, but it also brought along trade. And it also changed the political systems around the world as well. And the age of enlightenment, I think, is important for students to know because it brought about our modern political system, and students can see how that developed over time from a global perspective, because these ideas were not just limited to Europe, they spread throughout the world. And even now, they're spread about the world and impact our modern political systems. So this first part of the website is my homepage. And here I talk about the space. I talk about how I created this website to build a community for students, to build an engaging learning environment for students. And I think my website reflects that based off of the various assignments and websites I give to teachers and students to access. And then here we have a quote: "We are not makers of history, we are made by history." I just thought this was a really cool quote demonstrating the value of history. And then here's about me as an educator. I talk about how I have many experiences talking to people from all over the world, and I have global connections myself. I talk to people in various countries, and also I've helped out in classrooms in other countries, which has given me a new perspective on how teaching is done in other countries. And also I was able to share my ideas and my experiences to other students around the world. Here you'll have my video where I'm discussing that as well. And then I talk about here why I chose the age of exploration and enlightenment period. As I mentioned before, it's mainly because it demonstrates the idea of a global world and everyone being connected. Then here we have the standards that I follow. And down here is some contact information. Next, we have the subpages on home. So here I talk about what is history, and I describe a lot of the misconceptions that people have about history. For example, a lot of people think of history as being a static subject, one that doesn't change, but it's just as dynamic as any other subjects such as science or mathematics. There's always something new to be learned in history. It's not something that's just finished and a topic that's already been completely studied. There's always new discoveries, especially in the world of archaeology, and also even in looking at sources as well. Historians are able to find new information that they hadn't previously thought of before. And so I want to show students this, that history is dynamic, it's relevant to today as well, because if you want to understand modern global issues, you need to be able to study the history as well. And since we do live in a global society, it's important to know. Next here, we have some useful links. I put it by category. So we have world history links. This is a source book. It has a bunch of interesting primary sources that can be used for world history. And then this here is a website that essentially is made from the Met Museum, and it's for kids, but it also has a lot of interesting information about various artifacts in the museum itself. And here for American history, we have different tools such as the Smithsonian History Explorer made by the Smithsonian Museum. And this next section I think is the most important. It teaches students actual skills that they'll need to know when they're writing, not only in my class, but also in other classes. And also it teaches research skills to find different books and websites and different tools, and also how to do citations as well. And then down here, we have videos about the importance of citations and the difference between primary and secondary sources, something very interesting and important for students to know when they're writing a history article or history essay. Okay. And next, I talk about digital interactives, which are essentially tools that can be used online. This one I think is my favorite. It's called Geochrone, and essentially it's a timeline with a map, and you can change the time on the map, and then it shows how the territories change over time. I think this is super valuable when you're reading a history book, because you need context of where you are and what time you're studying. And it can also be useful for students for presentations because they can show that as well. And Preparing for the Oath is an American history interactive. It has various games and quizzes that can be utilized to study the American government. And Museum of the World was made by the British Museum, and it has an interactive that shows the different artifacts from the British Museum, when they were made, and some interesting facts about them. And I think it could be really useful if students ever want to study about various archaeological artifacts. And the next section that I talked about is the assistive technology. The first one I talked about is Language Reactor. Language Reactor is normally used for language learning. I personally use it for studying Japanese and English, but it could also be a useful tool for anyone that wants to have subtitles and be able to export those subtitles onto a document. So essentially, whatever language you're learning, you input that into the system. And then if you go on Netflix or YouTube and watch a video, it shows you the language you're learning and the English. But it also has a tool where you can go to the script and you can copy and paste that and put that onto a document. So it's very useful if you want to analyze a video without actually watching the video. If you just want to read the text from the video, it's a useful tool for that. And then here, for example, I talk about voice typing with Google Docs. Voice typing is really useful for those that struggle with typing and maybe their writing skills. And then down here, I have some videos about assistive technologies and useful guides. Okay, and then next, I talk about internet use and the importance of internet safety. Students nowadays will have to navigate the web. It's important, especially for research, but it's also important that they're cognizant of the material they're looking for and to avoid anything that may be inappropriate, but also to avoid giving out personal data that might be sensitive. And then down here, I talk about sources to navigate the internet and research safely. Google Scholar has academic articles and academic research, so a lot of the information is relevant and it's appropriate. And then down here, I have some other research tools that students can use as well. Next, I have the graphic organizer here on my page. And the graphic organizer assignment that I gave for students is about the Enlightenment period. Essentially, they have to make a poplet where they talk about Enlightenment thinkers such as Montesquieu, John Locke, and then they have to write information about them, and they have to include quotes and also important information about what their philosophical beliefs were. And then here I have the scoring guide for the assignment. So students can know how to get a good grade on the assignment. And then next I have the assessments. My formative assessment is a Padlet where essentially students have to go on Padlet and they have to include an image and write 3 ideals that represent the Enlightenment period. And then a 50-word reflection on how those ideals are reflected in modern society. I think this assignment is good for demonstrating that they know about the Enlightenment period and how it affected our modern world. And then next, the summative assessment. I have students create a Facebook profile of either an explorer or a philosophical thinker. I think it teaches them how to use tools like social media to provide information, and they have to create different statuses and include images that include information as if they were one of these important figures from this time. And then here is my rubric for students. Then next is the activity menu. I created a menu with various activities that students can do. And each of the activities includes different technological tools. For example, this one is creating a timeline using TimeToast. And there's also assignments where students learn practical skills like using Microsoft Excel or Google Sheets, where they have to talk about different explorers. And they also have to create a travel itinerary. They can also create their own Bill of Rights, which essentially is an assignment where they have to consider about the Bill of Rights, the Magna Carta, and apply what they know to create their own Bill of Rights. And then another assignment from here as well is a Novio lecture. The Novio lecture essentially is a lecture students have to create themselves to teach their classmates using Novio. So they have to record themselves and also include slides and things like that. And then lastly, there's a travel diary / journal that they can make where they pretend to be an explorer and they have to write a travel diary as if they were that explorer. And then here's the teacher lecture. For the lecture, I talk about the age of exploration and the rise of global trade. And I go into detail about early explorers such as Ibn Battuta and Marco Polo and how they influenced and laid the groundwork for the age of exploration. I talk about cartography, the creation of maps, and how those influenced the age of exploration. And then I include a video about the age of exploration that talks about some of the controversies of that time. And I have various maps showing where the different routes were of explorers. And then I focus on these 3 explorers, Vasco da Gama, Ferdinand Magellan, Christopher Columbus, because they all had an important impact on the world, even though some of them, such as Christopher Columbus, are controversial because they've done many terrible things. They still had an impact that can be seen today. And then I talk about each of them, go into details. And I talk about the Columbian Exchange. And this is one of the impacts of Columbus's voyage. And it was the first time there was cross-continental trade. So it is a good topic to discuss about global impact on history. And then lastly, I have my guided notes. I use various methods that help students take notes, fill in the blanks, reflections. Also, they have to create their own map using the information they know about the Columbian Exchange. And they also have a graphic organizer explaining information about the various explorers.